Apricot.
Yeah, so, something like that. I'm sure. That's. I'm glad to hear that. I was trying to avoid eating because if I eat one hamantashen, I'm going to eat them all. So I didn't even get a chance to see that. But that's exciting. Good. I'm glad to know the classics are being supported.
I harassed by a Chabad truck on 72nd Street, and he made me eat a hamantashen.
I mean, I don't know.
Look,
My
Philly
daughter
Dippers is
That is YouTube, right?
My daughter Wendy did a Zoom for Hadassah on making hamantashen, and I went on. It was fun too. And
Look,
I
if
had
anything actually works reasonably well on Zoom, it seems to be
Yeah.
Purim and Purim related activities. So,
I never had a warm hamantashen, like right out of the oven. They must be amazing.
they
So
are.
if you ever get a chance to be in Yerushalayim around this holiday, there is some spectacular stuff to enjoy and to eat. It's hard to replicate in the States, but
All right.
we do it. All right. So at this point, we'll list everybody again. A Shabbat Shalom. I'm going to mute everybody as we always do. Forgive me. Oh, I feel bad. I cut somebody off saying Shabbat Shalom. That doesn't feel right. All right. So let me get Lauren, my co-conspirator here. We've got Cantor Lauren with us. And even with a new microphone, we're always attempting to improve the experience here at our online temple. Hopefully you'll hear a little bit of a difference, but we know even probably through a can with a wire attached to it, Lauren's voice would sound amazing. So technology is not necessary, but it's always a nice addition. But it's really great to see all of you. It's great to celebrate Shabbat, and even though the sun has set, so technically it's the end of Purim, it is the beginning of Shushan Purim. So we can continue some of our Purim-related considerations, even though we don't live in a walled city. I think sometimes these days it feels like we are surrounded by walls. So we'll extend that experience just a little bit with us tonight, and we'll find a way to acknowledge Purim in a few important ways. But before we do that, we're going to welcome up, as I said, and let me bring her on, Alyssa Peak, who, in addition to being a generally wonderful person, is also now a member of our board and has been the co-chair of our social justice committee. And really, just as I said, somebody who, when we get back into a place where you can hang out with her, try to find ways to hang out with Alyssa. She's amazing. And Barry's pretty great too, but he's in a different room, so I can't. We'll have it a different occasion. So Alyssa, I think we're going to give you the test to unmute, and you're going to lead us in the blessing that's found on page 120 in our prayer books.
Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher yisrael b'mitzvah v'tzivanu hadlak ner shel Shabbat. And these aren't lighting.
Amen.
Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot and commanding us to Shabbat. And they're not lighting.
Amen. Amen. Beautifully done, Alyssa. I love it. And we get the reflection as well, which is even. Alyssa, thank you for everything that you do here at the temple, all the things that you will continue to do, all the leadership that you provide us. And tonight to give us the light from your home, from you and Barry, means a great deal. So really, thank you for doing this.
My pleasure. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom to you. And we'll give you now a chance to go back to your virtual seat. And Cantor, I think we're going to get ourselves started with Yedid Nefesh, page 128.
Correct.
Now that we're warmed up, we're going to turn to page 130 to begin Kabbalat Shabbat together at the very top of the page.
Lechu neranena l'Adonai נריע לצור אישנו, נקדמה פניו מתודה, בזמירות נריע לו, נקדמה פניו בתודה, בזמירות נריע לו.
We'll turn now to page 131, Shiru Ladonai. Turn to page 132, or Zarua, the last Hebrew paragraph at the bottom of the page. Turn now to page 134, Zamru Ladonai, which is at the very top of the page. Turn now to page 135, Romamu, the last paragraph in Hebrew in the middle of the page.
Adonai, Adonai,
turn now for Lecha Dodi on page 138. And a reminder, we'll do the first, second, fifth, and ninth paragraphs.
Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. 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 Shamor וזכור בדיבורך, כי שמיענו אל המיוחד, אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשם ותפארת ותחילה. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. לקראת שמה לכו בן אחד, כי מקור הברכה, בראש מקדם נסוכה. סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. התעוררי, התעוררי, כי בעורף ומאורי, אורי, אורי, שיר דברי. כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. בואי ושלום עטרת מעלה, גם בשמחה וצולה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה. בואי חלה, בואי חלה. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela.
And we'll turn now to page 140.
מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב להודות לאדוני, ולזמר לשמך עליון, ולזמר לשמך עליון. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב להודות לאדוני, ולזמר לשמך ארז בלבנון יסגה שתולים בבית אדוני מחצרות אלוהינו יפריחו עוד ינום בשיבה דשנים ורעננים יהיו להגיד כי ישר אדוני צורי ולא פלטמו.
And we'll turn now to the Chatzi Kaddish on page 144.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה מלמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בעגלה בעגלה ובזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם על מעלמיה יתמרח יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויינשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי קודשה בריחו לילה מן כל מרחתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה תמן מרם בעלמה ויאמרו אמן.
We'll turn now to page 146 for the Baruch Hu.
Am I awake? Am I prepared? Are you listening to my prayer? Can you hear my voice? Can you understand? Am I awake? Am I prepared? Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam
And we'll turn now to page 148, and we'll read together in English at the bottom of the page, the first blessing before the Shema. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who speaks the evening into being, skillfully opens the gates, thoughtfully alters the time and changes the seasons, and arranges the stars in their heavenly courses according to plan. You are creator of day and night, rolling light away from darkness and darkness from light, transforming day into night and distinguishing one from the other. Adonai Tzvaot is your name. Ever-living God, may you reign continually over us into eternity. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings on evening.
ומעביר יום ומביא לילה ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה אדוני צבאות שמו אל חי וקיים תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני המריב הרבים אהבת עולם בית ישראל עמך אהבת תורה ומצוות חוקים ומשפטים אותנו למדת על כן אדוני אלוהינו בשוכנו וקומנו נשיח בחוקיך ונשמח בדברי תורתך ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד כי הם חיינו לאורך ימינו ובהם נגע יומם ולילה מאהבתך, אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד.
Please join me on page 154. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ושוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Turn now to page 157, and you can join me at home as we read at the top of the page. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. And we'll turn to page 158, Mi Chamoch. Turn now to the top of page 161.
Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storm. Hashkimeinu, Adonai Eloheinu. Hashkimeinu.
turn now to page 162.
השמיים ואת הארץ ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם וביום השביעי שבת וינפש שבת וינפש שבת וינפש ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לתורתם ברית עולם ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לתורתם ברית עולם.
In a moment, Cantor will help us to begin the Amidah together on page 164. And then, as always, we're going to continue silently and to use this time in the most meaningful way possible. And a reminder that it will be a few minutes of silent prayer, so not to get worried that there's no glitch. And just use this time again to connect to your deepest places, connect to your heart, connect to what we call our Tfilat Halev. So, Cantor, if you'd help us again, page 164, and then we'll continue on our own.
Adonai Sabatai Tiftach Ufi Hagit Tfilatecha Adonai open up my lips and my mouth may declare your praise. Ay, 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 ay. עושה שלום ממרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ועל כל ישראל. נאמרו, נאמרו, אמן.
That was especially beautiful. I loved that. So we're going to think now and turn our hearts and our attention towards those in our lives, in our community, and around the world who are in need of healing. As we turn to page 371, I'll begin by reading a list of those that we are thinking of, as I said, in our community, but I invite all of you who would like to and feel comfortable to share any additional names in our chat or simply to hold your loved ones in your hearts. We're thinking tonight of Yerachmiel Ben Hinda, Paloma Chow Juan, Samuel Moskowitz, Audrey Lubo, Evie Romano, Chaim Leib, Andrew Edelman, Robert Posner, Joyce Weinberg, Rick Gold, Stu Pollock, Jane London, Catherine Guarino, Emunah Chava, Sandra Furman, Raina Walsh, Deirdre Klein, Stephanie Skitt, Judy Stern, Miriam Cornfield, Raz Brody, Chana Ruth Bat Sarah, Marlise Silverberg, Susan Spruce, Fagel Tzipora Bat Elisheva Bat Sarah, Richard Gambino, Michelle Sawicki, Adobasha Bat Yitzchak, Tuya Menachem Ben Chaim, Rivka Bat Devora, Amy and Gavin Tucker, Janice Kurz, David Dowling, Neil Elliott and Eileen Rosen, Israel Ben Yitzchak, Ben Sion Ben Moshe, Lorraine Danis, Buddy Kossoff, Shelley Newmark, David Kyle Klopman, Rivka Bat Rachel, Sarah Bat Chana, Moshe Eliezer Ben Sivia, Peretz Ben Yehuda, and Leah Bat Naomi, as well as George and Nancy. And again, we'll add all the names that have been shared in our chat and those that we're holding in our hearts, and the cantor will lead us in the Mishaberach again on page 371. Thank you, Cantor. You can take a little bit of a break from the spotlight. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And while it is technically already passed, even though Shushan Purim is ongoing, we don't technically, at least none of us on the call tonight, I think, are in a walled city. So celebrating Shushan Purim is something to decide. But I want to talk a little bit about Purim tonight because, I have a few thoughts. It's really quite a remarkable holiday, quite a unique holiday. And the Megillah itself and how we interface with it and interact with it is really quite interesting. And as those that were with us last night, my father, Peter, who's a better Megillah reader than I ever could be, was kind enough to join us and chanted most of the parts of the Megillah aside from the parts that I did. When I was talking to him today, the only critique he had of my reading was that it was too slow. And that's usually not the advice that you would expect, right? Usually you're told, slow down. Every one of my students, when we get to their speech, hear the Bar Torah at their Bar Bat Mitzvah, the first thing I tell them is slow down. So why is there this, tradition of being fast? And even if you heard my father, his inflection is really largely at the end of each pasuk of haltingly sort of ending it as opposed to drawing it out. And there is a very practical reason for that, which is that there are 4 mitzvot associated with Purim. The primary one of them is hearing the actual Megillah read. So, of course, anybody that is familiar with the Megillah in its entirety, it's 10 chapters long. It would be like us reading, a good section of the Torah all at once on one Shabbat. And we're not obligated to hear it once. Technically, we're supposed to hear it also in the morning of. So in that situation, you have a scenario where a very long book has to be read. You have people who, because of the other part of Purim, may have been perhaps imbibing a little bit or a little bit in a certain kind of altered state. Eventually, the natives get a little bit restless. And so a tradition developed over time that the chanting of the Megillah oftentimes happens at a rapid pace, and in certain cases at a very rapid pace. So I was thinking about this a lot, and so I decided to go back to the Talmud and to really try to understand a little bit about where is the sort of basis for this and this sort of understanding. And I was really shocked to find that I was not familiar with one conversation that happens amongst the rabbis, which may surprise you as well. So in Masechet Megillah, which while the name may suggest, right, the word Megillah we associate with the holiday of Purim exclusively, the word Megillah in Hebrew means a scroll. And so while there is the Megillat Esther, right, the scroll of Esther that we read on Purim, there are 4 other Megillot, 4 other scrolls that are read through different parts of the year. And really the Torah itself is functionally a Megillah. So the entire section of the Talmud that deals with Megillah, as it's called, is not just about Purim and not just about the Megillah. It's about any of the sort of sacred texts, the scrolls, and how to, as I said, interact with them and what the obligations are in terms of their public reading or their consideration within our calendar. So in this section of the Talmud, we get a description in the Mishnaic part of the Talmud as opposed to the Gemara. And it says on page 19a, there is a question that is asked, okay, beginning from what part of the story does one need to hear in order to have actually fulfilled the obligation of hearing the Megillah? In other words, if you walk in, let's say, as chapter 2 is being read, or chapter 5 or chapter 7, have you fulfilled the mitzvah of hearing the Megillah if you missed out on the other parts of it? So our assumption might be that this is a sort of flat out no, there's only one answer, but I'd like to actually demonstrate that there are a couple different ways of approaching this according to the rabbis. So on the one hand, you have Rabbi Meir, who says that you must read all of it. Rabbi Yehuda says that you actually only need to start reading from the 5th verse of chapter 2. And then Rabbi Yossi says that actually you really only need to be hearing it from when it begins in chapter 3. And then eventually you have actually in the Gemara later on, the rabbis point out that Shimon Bar Yochai says that actually you can start as far in as chapter 6. And again, I have to remind everybody, we're talking about a 10-chapter book. So while it may not be obvious because we don't have the text in front of us, let me just explain what the differences are between these different starting points. If you begin the book in chapter 1, much of chapter 1 is focused on the heroine, one of the heroines of the story, who is Vashti. So if you begin at the beginning of chapter 2, it would be as if you were leaving Vashti out of the story. And if you were to begin in chapter 2 as the second suggestion, then you would ultimately start the story basically with Esther. Esther becomes the sort of focus at that point. And if you were to start it in chapter 3 is actually focused more on Mordechai. So depending on where you would start the story according to these different traditions, and chapter 6, you've already missed half the story itself, you could conceivably have left out a significant portion of not just the story itself, but of the heroes and heroines of that story. And so it may be, as I said, it was surprising to me, and it may be surprising to you to hear that there was even a suggestion by any of these rabbis. And to be very clear, if you're quoted in the Mishnah or the Gemara, you're not some outlying rabbi, right? Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon Yochai in particular, these are significant rabbis of history. And to suggest that it's actually acceptable to not hear the entire thing should at the very least pique up our interests to make us consider what it is that's at stake here. But of course, for me, whatever their rationale, whatever the rabbis are ultimately thinking and their ideas behind all of this, there is a concerning part of it to me, which is the idea that someone could come into the story in a place in which Vashti is not known, in which Esther is not given the origin that she deserves in the story, in which that we begin in the 3rd chapter with Mordecai, or in which we begin even conceivably in the 6th chapter, in which half of the story has passed by. And I think that there is a certain kind of cautionary tale here for all of us, which is to consider how it is that we may intentionally or otherwise leave out parts of the story and leave out parts of the narrative, and in particular to leave out voices that really need to be heard. And part of the reason that I was thinking about this is something of a personal, I don't want to call it a lament, but a concern that I've had around the celebration of Purim for a long time, which is that I don't think that most of us actually hear the entire Megillah. And even if we don't hear the actual entire Megillah chanted, I doubt that we even would go so far as to sit down and read it from chapter 1 until chapter 10. And I think this is a part of the challenge that we face, not just now. I think the rabbis even then are arguing about sort of what is the bare minimum that is necessary in order to fulfill the mitzvah. And of course, the danger of the bare minimum approach is that inevitably you're going to be at the editorial whims of whoever has decided what to include and what to exclude. So while I appreciate the fact that this congregation is trusting of their rabbi to identify verses of significance in our limited time together and the ones that we picked last night, it did start to eat at me a little bit, that we jump as much as we jump and that we paraphrase more than we actually read. And I think that, increasingly these days we start to understand, right, Vashti for a very long time was not talked about as a heroine character. She was talked about sort of as a lead in to getting to Esther. But increasingly we talk more and consider more, right, what is Vashti's role in this story? Where does she demonstrate her standing up to a person who is trying to really, abuse and take advantage of her? It would break my heart to think that there are people who could begin the story at a latter point and not have that part of the narrative with them, right? To leave out those voices. And one of the unique characteristics of the Megillah as a whole is that it's the only book of the Tanakh in which there is no mention of God. God is nowhere to be found. You won't see a description of God's name in any of its variations. And the tradition explains this by saying that God is there, but God is sort of mysteriously behind the scenes. God is in the moments. You have to look a little bit deeper. And while that may seem like a sort of convenient rhetoric for the rabbis, there's another part of this as well, which is the sort of, as I said, the hidden narratives, right? The hidden stories, the things that we either purposely or even unconsciously leave out. And I think this year especially is one in which I do regret the fact that we haven't figured out some way to really address this Megillah, this story of our people in its entirety. And I'm not sure exactly how in an hour, other than speed reading through it, which has become the other tradition, to have this experience. But what I would like to ask of everybody is that even if the holiday itself is past, that you find some time over the weekends to actually go and read a little bit, to really take a chance and explore the Megillah in its fullness. It doesn't mean that you'll come away necessarily with a greater appreciation of or a greater understanding of, but I bet you that you will find things, as I did this year, that you weren't even really conscious of, simply because we're getting one sliver of the story as opposed to its fullness. And while we're talking a lot about these days about truth and about how to identify truth and how to ascertain what is important and what is the things that we should leave behind, I think, again, almost every app you see these days is a means by which to shortcut, right? To go to the bare minimum, right? To read a book in 4 lines or to see an infographic that will explain it. There are certain things that are really wonderful and beneficial about that, but my worry is that in our attempt to sort of condense everything into easily consumed realities, that we lose, again, a lot of the in-between. And I think that if the rabbis were already arguing over this several hundred years ago, if not thousands of years ago, about, right, how to keep people's attention, how to keep people engaged, I think the one thing that I wanted to say is that even though there are 4 opinions that we understand from the tradition, there's only one that we go with, which is that the obligation is really to hear the entirety. It's really to hear the entire thing. And I think that is a message for us, again, to really consider, are we getting the full story? Are we getting the full story from our tradition? And are we getting the full story from the stories that are being told around us? And one of the great things I think about this holiday of Purim and this Megillah that we read every single year is that it's an incredibly layered, nuanced, challenging, and really actually inspiring piece of sacred literature. And as we shared a little bit yesterday, it can even have an impact, believe it or not, on the foundation of this country and some of its most important moments. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll tell you at the Oneg. The story of Esther, the story of Vashti, the story of Mordechai, the story of the Jewish people, these are stories that should not be abridged. That need to be told in their entirety, good, bad, and everything in between. And especially these days where there are a shocking number of parallels between the experiences of our ancestors in Shushan and some of what we are experiencing today, I think this year in particular, it's worth going back and really trying to take in the entirety of it and to see it, again, warts and all, everything good and bad and in between. So I'm sure you have a lot going on this weekend, but if you can find a little bit of time, you don't have to speed read through it, but 10 chapters, I think we can all do it. And we'll see. Perhaps next year we'll figure out some way to get a little bit more of Megillah into our experience here at the temple. So with that, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, a belated Chag Purim Sameach, a Chag Shushan Purim Sameach for those who may be calling it from Israel. But otherwise, really, I hope these words will give us all a little bit of a zetz, as they say, a little shot in the arm to do a little bit more digging, a little bit more work. So again, with that, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, and I'll invite Cantor Lauren back to the virtual bima here as we turn to page 586 at the very bottom of the page, and you can join with me again, 586 at the bottom. Aleinu l'shabeach. Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol latet gedula liyotzer breshit shelo asanu kegoye haratzot ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. I'll now invite those in mourning and those observing yahrzeit, if you so choose, to rise at home, either in body or in spirit. As first we remember those who've passed in recent months: Miles Ambrose, Fred Eber, Nancy Fisher, Saul Fisher, Edwin Friedman, Sandra Friedman, Lucy Gladstone, Lois Herr, Phyllis Katz, Laura Kurz, Madge Judith Parcher, Steve Popkin, Vera Shaps, Norma Small, Marjorie Weinberg Berman, and Ann Weiss. We also mark the yahrzeits that occurred during the last week for Paul Aaron, Sylvia Birkin, Morris Busgang, Arlene Collins, Ida Goldfarb, David Gross, Doris Harlan, Ray Katz, Ida Klitnick, Harry Koplovich, Elise Chris, Jay Krotman, Harold Levine, Estelle Liu, William Miller, Harry Osofsky, Bruce Polchek, Alexandra Pomeroy, Herman Press, Selma Press, Jenny Rodney, Michael Ruckin, Henrietta Sanborn, Jeanette Schwartz, Grace Soffer, Louise Spitz, Celia Steinbeck, Joseph Tarlow, Sidney Tobias, and Leonora Yanovich. And if there are any names of anyone that's being said, the Kaddish is being said for, that we didn't mention, you're welcome to mention them in the chat or simply to hold your loved ones in your heart. And we'll join together on page 598 for the Mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabba, be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayichon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shemei rabba mevarach le'alam le'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei d'kudsha berichu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shalom rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael V'imru amen. Zichronam livracha. May every one of their memories be for a blessing. Little adjustment there. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Cantor Lauren will give you a little bit of a break for the moment, and I'm going to welcome up one of my dear friends, one of our great teachers and board member and overall just wonderful person, Dr. Brad Tepper. And we go calling him Bensi around here, but let's bring him on. Bensi, how you doing? Good. We're going to unmute you.
Good.
Very good.
Good.
And also to thank you again as part of and one of the great really impetus for why we have our Chug Briut, our wellness committee, of which we had a great program, and we really appreciate everything that you and everyone that you've helped to bring together have really brought to this temple. And certainly thank you for again everything that you do and everything that you are, and we appreciate tonight telling us a little bit about what's coming up here at the temple, because there's always something. There's always something. So
I am happy to do that. Erev Tov Chevre. It is my privilege to read to this week's announcements for our shul. So, Shabbat morning service will be live streamed tomorrow at 10 a.m. Please join us on our website, our YouTube channel, or our Facebook page. Archived versions will be available for viewing shortly after each service ends. Then, please join us for Torah study at 12 o'clock noon with Rabbi Dan. Nida Mitzvah is Monday at 11:30 a.m. Hebrew School, 4 p.m. The Social Justice Committee will be meeting virtually at 5 p.m. and Musar practice at 7 p.m. Rabbi Dan's class on Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and the Prophets is on Wednesday at 12 noon, and the B'nai Mitzvah class will meet at 4 p.m. On Friday at 9 a.m., Rabbi Dan teaches his class on Pirkei Avot. Coming up for March, a month filled with music, wine tasting, classes, tours, art, and because it's the festival of Pesach, 2 virtual Seders. The annual Women's Seder, sponsored by our Women's Rosh Chodesh group, is on Sunday, March 14th. And our community Passover Seder, hosted by Rabbi Dan and Lou Geffen, is on Sunday, March 28th. Both are open to members, their families, and friends. So mark your calendars and look for details on all our programs and events in our weekly e-blasts and our website calendar. If you're not getting our emails, please let the temple office know. Finally, we welcome you to join us after services tonight for a virtual Oneg Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom L'Kulchem.
Shabbat Shalom L'cha.
Toda.
That's great. Thank you so much for doing that. As always, just great to see you on the screen, and miss you, buddy. But really, thank you for doing that. All right, we'll let you relax. And one other thing, just to point out, this Sunday, as part of our wonderful Hebrew school, we're going to have a. It wasn't on your list, Bensi. Don't worry. It was. We have a something like what Ron and Susie helped us to do last weekend, in which there was a pickup of Hamantashen. So we're doing a whole thing with our Hebrew school and people dressing up in costumes and driving by at Havens Beach, and I'm going to be most likely dressed as a banana again, because apparently that's what I am, and it's really it should be a lot of fun. So it's meant for our Hebrew school, but it's important for all of you to know that that's going on. All of our wonderful young people and their families, we're excited to see them, even through a car door. It will still be a real treat to be able to see them with my own eyes, which is really something. So with that, we're going to welcome Cantor Lauren to give us a closing song before we do Kiddush, and then we'll stay on for Oneg.
Thank you. So we're going to stay in the spirit of Purim. Chag Purim, Chag Purim, Chag Gadol HaLayudim, Masechot HaShanim, Zmirut Rekudim, Havana Risha Rash Rash Rash, Havana Risha Rash Rash Rash, Havana Risha Rash Rash Rash,
Okay, now I just, it's important to pay attention to the chat. I missed a couple of things, but one thing I want to acknowledge before we go to Kiddush. So it's going to be Jerry Goldsmith's 91st birthday. How is that possible? Is that right, Jerry? Well, you got a hand up. I'll tell you what, at Oneg, we're going to really celebrate you and sing a Yom Huledet Sameach. But it's just that's great. And I promise, Jerry, we're going to unmute you in just a second when we can sing to you, but that's wonderful. So Nicole, thank you for letting me know. I didn't know. So Shabbat Shalom, everybody. We're going to go right now to page 123, if memory serves. And if you have a glass of grape juice or wine handy, you are welcome to join me. Again, page 123. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam morei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho b'yahava u'vratzon inchilanu zikaron lema'aseh v'reishit ki hu yom techila le'ikra'ei kodesh Zecher letziat Mitzrayim, ki v'anu v'acharta, ve'otanu kidashta, mikol ha'amim, ve'shabbat kodshecha, ve'ahava u'ratzon inchaltanu, baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh ha'shabbat. Amen. L'chaim to everybody. Shabbat Shalom. We're going to say goodnight to our friends who are watching on the stream. Take care of yourselves. I hope we can see you tomorrow at some point, if not next week.